National security depends on staying ahead of the threat. At Booz Allen, our intelligence and technical experts work together to integrate emerging technologies for the next generation capabilities. When national security depends on you, we're here to propel your mission forward.
Swiss Army knife with Laura Dehmlow. She is Section Chief of the Foreign Influence Task Force at the FBI, with Cynthia Kaiser, Section Chief for Cyber National Security Intelligence at FBI, and Tonya is moderating this session. She is the new Assistant Director at the Directorate of Intelligence at FBI. Tonya, over to you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Hello, everyone. So I want to pick up on the theme that Chris Inglis emphasized earlier this morning, which is the idea that to defeat one of us, you have to defeat all of us. I think that in order for that to be true, each of us in this room and the organizations we represent have to have an understanding of the authorities and capabilities that each of us brings to the table when we're dealing with national security threats. And not only to understand them, but to have a readiness and ease of engaging with each other to leverage those. I think that's even more necessary because modern threats challenge how the IC is both organized and authorized. The adversaries that we're facing are seeking to exploit gaps between how we handle foreign and domestic threats, how we use our criminal and national security authorities, and how we're organized in the government and the private sector to together deal with these threats. The good news I bring you today is that if you challenge and re-examine what you think you know about the FBI, you'll find that it's an IC agency that actually has the authorities and capabilities that bridge a lot of these gaps that our adversaries are seeking to exploit. It's uniquely positioned as an IC and law enforcement agency with the ability to collect, share, and analyze intelligence about threats here domestically, and it has the ability to act on it. Whether that's to disrupt it or to engage with victims or the private sector, IC agencies, or foreign partners to take action against it. So those are some of the reasons why I have come to refer to the FBI as the IC's Swiss Army knife. It has a tool for almost every occasion, and you want to have it within reach when you need it. So to amplify that and to expand on it, I'm really pleased to speak to two exceptional leaders who are currently in the FBI, Laura Dehmlow and Cynthia Kaiser. You can read their bios, but together they are the two senior executives in the FBI most responsible for defending and preserving our election security. So let's start there. Laura, you and Cynthia have been immersed in election security through multiple election cycles. For those here who might only tune into this issue, maybe every 2 or 4 years, I'm interested in what trends you're seeing as we get closer to the midterms. For example, a few weeks ago, Meta released a report on their removal of Chinese social media operations aimed at influencing US users' attitudes on domestic politics. Is that new for China, and do you expect to see more such activity from them either in the midterms or 2024?
Thanks so much for the question. Afternoon, everybody. Really delighted to be here. And yes, we have had the pleasure and the privilege of focusing on elections for a minute now. I think in the influence space, what we really come to understand is that although we spend an enormous amount of time and energy focusing on ensuring the integrity of elections, both from an infrastructure perspective, an influence perspective, a security perspective, elections are not organizing principles for the foreign actors that we're focused on. They are moments in time in our democratic processes that are certainly taken advantage of and are vulnerable, but what we've really come to understand in the influence space is that foreign actors are engaging in really persistent and consistent efforts to distort and influence our democratic processes and our policymaking environment. And the tools and actors in those systems are expanding. We've got an overly pithy way of describing Russia, China, and Iranian intent in this space. For Russia, they're looking to have us tear ourselves apart. For China, they're looking to manage our decline, and the Iranians want us to mind our own business. That's certainly an oversimplification, but I think the takeaway here is that the tools and actors in those systems are really expanding and growing, and the meta takedowns that you referenced highlight at least nascent efforts on the part of the Chinese to do more divisive content amplification inside our political system. That is obviously concerning, that it's an expanding toolkit and that we might see sort of Russia-style influence operations, but the tools that this range of actors are using are digital influence operations. They are hack and leak operations. It's the human-to-human interaction and engagement and influence operations as well. The other thing that I think we've highlighted and noted over the past few years is that unlike in 2016, we're not seeing adversaries create narratives from whole cloth. They are taking authentic American perspectives and amplifying issues on both sides of the aisle in covert and undeclared, non-transparent ways. And so for the FBI, our role in that has to be really, really tailored in that we're countering foreign actors and their activities. We're not countering narratives. We are looking to harden targets and impose costs in ways that put our constitutional protections, speech protections in particular, sort of first and foremost in our mind. The FBI's role in all of this space is certainly an intelligence-informed role, and for every exquisite piece of information that comes from private sector intelligence community partners, the FBI has a responsibility and capacity to develop a response to that and look to impose costs using our law enforcement authorities, and importantly in the intelligence space, to inform policy action and private sector activity as well.
It's interesting you mentioned that in terms of pushing back on the foreign actors and their narratives, and then I think being transparent in how we're doing so and being able to act. Cynthia, I think, let's talk about a country that we haven't talked about yet in these 2 days, which is Iran. And I think we've talked a lot, especially as we discuss Ukraine, with some of the very forward-leaning activity by the IC and the administration to share intelligence publicly that we had about Russia's intent to invade. But there was a similar action by FBI and ODNI leaders to expose election interference efforts by Iran before the 2020 election that I think garnered relatively less attention. Could you just talk us through kind of what Iran was doing in the lead up to that election and how you and ODNI and others thought about whether to publicly expose it and when?
Certainly. So first, the Iranians in the lead up to the election used a mixture of cyber operations and foreign influence to try to sow doubt in Americans' minds about the results of the election and really to sow doubt about our electoral system and democracy overall. They did this campaign primarily in 3 parts. First, they conducted research and reconnaissance against at least 11 states' websites in an attempt to obtain U.S. voter information. They succeeded in at least one case, obtaining voter information from a state through a misconfigured website. Then they deployed specifically tailored messages to different segments of the U.S. population. So people that they identified as Republican received one set of messages. People that they identified as Democrats received a completely different set. And then third, they had also compromised a content management provider, so provider to U.S. media entities. They had compromised some of those accounts, and if they had succeeded in using that, that would have allowed them to disseminate false messages via legitimate U.S. media sites. So kind of in the backdrop of seeing all of this, I think what came forward was a blueprint for how we can do a lot of these actions going forward and how we really think about public exposures and how we mix that with some of our countering activities. We sought to expose the actors using our normal mechanisms, cybersecurity advisories, mixing our subject matter expertise with the new information, Many of you remember the press conference with the D&I Director of FBI and Director of CISA. And we really blanketed the space overall. At the same time, we were doing the normal things we do as the FBI. We were going out and we were talking to victims, we were talking to targets, obtaining information from them. And we used that then to impose costs on them later, with the public element and the public exposure of that being charges against 2 of the individuals, sanctions against more, and a $10 million reward through State Department's Rewards for Justice to help aid in the capture of those 2 individuals. But the takeaways from that, it wasn't always a given, especially before some of the Iranian activity went public by their own means, that we were going to be able to push out as much information as we wanted to. And that, it goes back to that tension that that a lot of the folks talked about yesterday, between trying to protect sources and methods and do the kind of warning we need to do for the American people. At the forefront of that, I saw a real change in the FBI and a lot of folks around the community, where we knew the stakeholders. We'd been working with the election officials for years at this point. We knew what they needed. We knew how we could word those warnings to them, and we were able to really effectively behind the scenes advocate for that information to be made public. I think number 2 is the country level attribution's just fine. It's okay to go early. And I think that's a great example in the Russia case that we learned, that you don't need to get down to the individual level. You don't need every technical fact. You can take folks along the journey with us. We can help folks along the way. And then third, the typical FBI activities also really mattered, and part of that's the trust from the private sector. And as part of engaging with the victims of the campaign, we were able to work with that content management provider that I talked about earlier. We worked with them to force a password reset, to enact 2-factor authentication, and then we saw the Iranians try to come back the day after the election, and they were stopped because we were able to engage and because the private sector was willing to work with us on that.
So let me stay with that theme of information sharing, which of course I think everyone would agree is critically important. And here's where I think we've really seen a sea change, everyone would also agree, since 2016. I think CISA, the FBI, and state and local officials, including recently the Maricopa County Chief Information Security Officer, have described a night and day difference since 2016 in the information sharing in both directions. But we have to acknowledge that we may be entering uncharted waters in this important state and federal relationship with, according to news reports, candidates currently on the ballot who don't accept past election results, who may be in these important state-level positions overseeing elections in 2024. Does that affect the way you think about information sharing?
No. Simply, I think that we've learned through 6 years of really engaging doing this that transparency makes everybody safer. And we're going to continue to share the information because it's the right thing to do and because we know that sharing that information works. Now, we've come from hesitancy or skepticism among election officials before. In 2016 to 2018 to 2020, that night and day difference that you talked about, that was on the back of a lot of hard work from CISA, from FBI, from many across the government, and a lot of hard work on the election official side to try to overcome skepticism or schisms between our groups. And so we have a track record of being able to really push that forward. And also, I think, there's an element of talking about skepticism when you're outside of elections and not knowing it as deeply. But I think what we've consistently told people before most of these elections is, if you want to know more about a system, go volunteer to be a poll worker, go be a part of learning about the election system. And I think once you're a part of that, once you see the redundancies, see the work that these officials are putting forward, it's hard not to be proud of all of those efforts and to really understand the resiliency of the system. Now, we do hear from some election officials in our engagements more recently that they're concerned about the local level potential insider threats, especially with some of the narratives ongoing. We're talking with them on that, making sure we take in their concerns, and we're just continuing to really work with these officials to be able to provide them the information they need. We're not going to change how we're going to do that, and we're going to work with them on any potential threats they see to their systems or their processes overall.
Thanks. So one last question before we break for lunch, and I encourage all of you to continue the conversation with our panelists over lunch. FBI Director Wray has 4 leadership principles, his pillars, one of which is the FBI brand, and I'll quote him here. Building on the brand that matters the most. And by that I mean not the views of the pundits or the prognosticators or the armchair critics, but the people we actually do the work with, the people we do the work for, because theirs are the opinions that ultimately matter. So for the average person, and I'd venture to guess even some of the people in this room, when they think of the FBI brand, it still conjures law enforcement, putting handcuffs on people, and men in dark suits, with the emphasis on men. And yet, here we are on the stage, 3 women intelligence analyst executives in pretty influential roles, and we are far from the only ones in the organization. So I'd be remiss if I did not give you the chance to share your personal and professional reflections on that, and also, what do you wish the people in this room understood better about the FBI?
So, a few years into my career, I was back at Quantico and doing some training for new agents. And there was a line of folks that was similar to this. We had to cut the Q&A a little bit short. And so there's a line of folks after my session who wanted to talk to me. And the last guy had waited around to ask me what I was doing there. It was just a real reflection of the fact that how I behave in the world, how I reflect my own sort of personality, a lot of jazz hands in my presentations normally, et cetera, not in a black suit, was not what they'd seen through the course of the training that they were seeing, right? And I'm very happy to say that I don't get asked that question anymore. I don't think it's because I've assimilated. I still don't have any black suits, but I don't get asked that question anymore, and I'm really proud to be part of a generation who I think is the first in a really necessary shift in our diverse makeup, both at every level, but especially at the executive management level. I think we've made a lot of progress because we recognized we had a diversity problem and are actively seeking opportunities to correct and fix that. And I think what I'm really excited about is that next generation of folks where it's going to get even better, and these sort of expectations of, we all follow rules, we are all rule following, but sort of these type A personalities who see very black and white solutions to potentially really gray problems we're all facing. I think that's shifted a lot, and that's a result of diverse influences coming into our leadership ranks, and really opening up, I think, the roles of how and where the FBI operates in the world and these really hard problem sets to folks who've got an intelligence background rather than a cop background, frankly.
Cynthia?
So there's really just no way to address the problems that we're all talking about here without diverse experiences, without diverse thought, to come to the table, to come up with creative solutions. And as Laura mentioned, I think that there's a recognition within the FBI that we needed to change, we've made great changes, and that we also have a ways to go. And it's that ways to go that I'm excited about, especially with the 3 of us and our counterparts being in the positions we're in, because that frees us to have really honest conversations that help bring up the next generation of female leaders. It enables us to not kind of take a risk-based approach to mentorship to say, can I really say that to somebody that I see bias here and that, like how to counter it, and to say, no, I see bias here, here's how you counter it. And so a good example of that is I had a supervisor kind of coming up through the ranks, and there's different benchmarks you have to address. And there was a certain benchmark that anecdotally I'd seen that, I was worried. Females or minorities maybe weren't getting through at as high of a rate, at least in what I had noticed. And so I was able to just sit down and have a very frank conversation. This is what I've seen, and you need to take more time than you normally would to prepare for this. You don't want to give anybody the opportunity to not allow you to get to that next level because you're ready. So, I want to be honest with you. I don't want to tell you about the world that we wish we inhabited. I want to tell you about the world that we do. She went through the process, passed with flying colors, is now a senior leader working for me. But I think what's heartening about that is that particular benchmark's gone away in the FBI. And there's a really great way now to have these good conversations with people, that people are willing to hear about them. And we're really, I think, going to be able to bring up a great generation behind us.
So thanks. I could talk with you all day. Fortunately, I actually get paid to do that as part of my job, but I'm glad the others here had the opportunity to hear from you as well. So thank you.
Thanks all.